Pick up now. You can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface. Beautiful, just beautiful.
I was 4 years old when we first landed on the moon, and my parents took me out into the backyard, me and my older sister. I just remember the moon was coming up over our house, and they pointed up and said, "We have people there." And to me, at 4 years old, I thought that just sounded like the best idea ever. So ever since I was little, I wanted to be an astronaut. I always had an interest in science. My father was a physics professor, and so I guess I got it from him. I love school, I love reading, so I kind of had all the basics, but I had absolutely no idea how one went about becoming an astronaut. In high school, they had a selection for the space shuttle. They had selected a new class of astronauts, and I was reading their biographies, and there was a lady that was selected. She had 2 master's degrees at the time, and I thought, 2 master's degrees? I can do that. And so even though I still didn't quite know what it took to be an astronaut, I knew at least I could get the basics down and legitimately put my hat into the ring for it.
This is Mission Control Houston.
Knowing that I wanted to be an astronaut, I always wanted to work at the Johnson Space Center, and I was extremely fortunate when I graduated for undergraduate school, I got hired on to work in the control center here. And so I started off my career as a flight controller working with the space shuttle program. My system was the arm on the space shuttle, so I sat in the control center when there were shuttle flights that had an arm on it, deploying and retrieving satellites. And then after a few years, I decided I wanted more education, and so I went back to graduate school, back to Rice University, got my PhD in space physics. Then at that point, I had to make the choice, stay in human spaceflight or do planetary science, which I had my scientific studies in. And I ultimately decided I wanted to stay in the human spaceflight world. Came back to JSC and worked a number of jobs here before I was ultimately selected as an astronaut in 2004. When you get the call that you're going to be an astronaut, it is amazing. And I had a few calls before that because I got selected on the 5th time, so I had 4 calls saying, not this time, not this time. But when I finally got the call, it's like, is it going to happen this time? It is so exciting. It's unbelievable. When you are selected to be an astronaut, you actually have roughly about a 2-year training program before you're even considered to be eligible for spaceflight. NASA will train you in everything that NASA needs you to do. You will get training in all the systems knowledge that you need. How does the space station work, to the detailed level of understanding the engineering that goes into the space station, and then how to operate the space station. Spacewalks, how do you conduct a spacewalk? And that is a lot of training because that is not an easy thing to do. How to fly our T-38 jets. Russian language, because it's an international partnership and the Russians are our main partners, and you will spend a lot of time training over in Russia. You got to learn the Russian language, and so we will teach you that as well. You get trained in basic sciences, you get trained in photography, you get trained in how to use a microscope, all these things that you may or may not have in your background. We're going to train you, and we're going to train you how we need you to do it. I actually had the privilege of going over and spending a lot of time in Russia training, learning how to fly their spacecraft, which was a pretty neat experience. I spent time over there learning that spacecraft and then traveling back here to learn whatever I needed, the specifics for my flight, and then also you train in all our international partner sites. And so I spent time in Canada, I spent time in Europe, I spent time in Japan. At that time, my training flow was about 3 years for my one flight, but you spend that much time and then finally get to go in space. My second flight, I got to ride on the SpaceX Crew Dragon. It was really neat to be an early crew member on that Dragon and working with SpaceX. It was a great experience.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
It's hard to describe what it's like to sit on a rocket when the engine's light and you start feeling all the vibrations and you can hear the noise and you just feel yourself starting to move. 8.5 minutes, that's how long it takes to get to space. You're floating. It's quiet and you're floating and you're in space. And so that is just a very surreal moment.
And so I thought I would show you some of what it's like to actually live on a spacecraft like this.
The space station is a lot bigger than people think. It's neat to be there, and it is really special to be able to accomplish this dream that you've had since your childhood. And to live in space, 6 months living in space, and it's a busy, busy time. You do so much while you're up there. It's great. I wish more people could experience being in space. Being a role model, it's a huge honor, and it's something I take very seriously because it is very important for people who are trying to decide what their path is going to be in life, to have good examples to follow. Like I was, I didn't know what it took to be an astronaut, but I knew it was possible somehow because there were other women doing that. And so I do think it's important that we have role models of all types and flavors of people, because you need all types and flavors of people to do big things in this world.